Renaissance Europe's mummy medicine market created history's most extensive organized grave robbing operation, systematically mining ancient Egyptian burial sites for medicinal purposes. Unlike simple tomb looting for artifacts, this trade specifically targeted mummified human remains, processing them into standardized medical preparations. The practice followed precisely defined manufacturing protocols. 16th century pharmacological texts detail exact grinding processes for mumia vera, true mummy, requiring specific body parts preferably from adult males. Historical trade records document an elaborate supply chain. Specialized expeditions to Egyptian necropolises harvested mummies, transported remains to Alexandria for processing, then exported standardized products throughout Europe. The trade volume was staggering. Port records from Venice alone show annual imports exceeding 200 mummy shipments during peak years. As demand outpaced authentic mummy supplies, sophisticated counterfeit operations emerged. Executed criminals' bodies were treated with bitumen and artificially aged in heated sand to mimic ancient preservation techniques, creating mumia falsificata that apothecaries often deliberately misrepresented as authentic. Consumption methods varied by condition. Treated pulverized mummy mixed with liquids for internal consumption, treated seizures and bleeding, while poultices, using fat extracted from mummy tissue, addressed external injuries. Most disturbing were specialized applications. Mummy milk, created by dissolving powdered mummy in breast milk, treated eye ailments, while skull moss, Eucenae, lichen growing on skulls of executed criminals, commanded premium prices for treating epilepsy. European aristocracy became particularly devoted consumers. Medical records of Francis I of France document his travel kit containing mummy powder prepared in portable silver containers. The practice represented history's longest-running medicinal cannibalism tradition, continuing well into the 18th century despite increasing scientific skepticism, with documented prescriptions appearing in German medical literature as late as 1908. Crusader armies pioneered systematic water supply contamination as deliberate strategy rather than incidental warfare damage. Unlike typical medieval sieges, Crusader contamination operations followed specifically developed protocols documented in recovered military communications. The primary technique, documented in both Christian and Muslim sources, involves strategic carcass placement, optimized for maximum water system penetration. Historical records describe specialized poisoning details, consisting of designated soldiers tasked with animal decomposition monitoring, timing carcass placement to waterways when putrefaction reached optimal contamination levels. Most sophisticated operations targeted underground aqueduct systems rather than obvious surface water. Teams located essential water infrastructure using captured local guides, then accessed subterranean channels through specially dug vertical shafts. Archaeological evidence confirms these accounts. Excavated Levantine wells from Crusader conflict zones contain remains of multiple animal species not native to immediate areas, indicating deliberate importation for contamination purposes. Muslim historical accounts describe defensive countermeasures, including specialized water tasting officials, dawakat al-miyah, assigned to continuous monitoring of vital water sources. The strategy proved remarkably effective. Medical chronicles from the Third Crusade document entire Muslim garrison populations suffering simultaneous illness 3 to 5 days after Crusader forces appeared near water sources, creating internal defensive collapse before direct military engagement. Perhaps most disturbing was the psychological dimension. Crusader forces deliberately left evidence of contamination visible, including partial animal remains near wells, creating terror-induced abandonment of otherwise defensible positions. The practice violated established warfare conventions on both sides. Arab physician Ibn al-Kuf's medical texts specifically condemn water poisoning as transgressing acceptable military conduct, while Pope Innocent III issued declarations against well poisoning as improper Christian conduct, though both prohibitions were routinely ignored throughout the crusading period. Colonial American scalp bounties evolved into a sophisticated market economy with standardized valuation systems that directly influence frontier warfare patterns. Unlike European mercenary compensation, scalp bounties featured progressive pricing tiers. Massachusetts Bay Colony's 1703 proclamation established the first formalized scale: 100 pounds for male Native American scalps above 12 years, 50 pounds for women, and 50 pounds for children under 12. The system created specialized frontier occupations, professional scalp hunters operating independently from military forces, developing collection and preservation techniques specifically for commercial purposes rather than traditional war trophies. Historical records document specialized scalp preparation methods developed solely for commercial verification. Partial facial skin remained attached to scalps, proving age/gender for accurate payment, while preservation techniques using salt and smoke maintained identifiable features during transportation to redemption centers. Most disturbing was the emergence of specialized tools, scalping knives with distinctive curved blades, produced specifically for commercial collectors, differed from military weapons, optimized for clean harvest, while maintaining identification features required for maximum bounty payment. Colonial account ledgers reveal the market's economic impact. New Hampshire's expenditures for scalp purchases exceeded all other defense spending combined during certain frontier conflict periods, with specialized redemption offices established in frontier towns, operating like commodity markets. The commercialization directly influenced combat tactics. Historical attack pattern analysis reveals significant correlation between bounty rate adjustments and targeting patterns, with women and children specifically targeted when their bounty values increased relative to adult males. The system's legacy persisted well into the 19th century, with Texas maintaining scalp bounty payments until 1885, creating what historians identify as North America's longest operating commercialized violence market. England's network of designated corpse roads formed a parallel transportation infrastructure specifically designed for human remains, with distinctive features separating them from ordinary pathways. Unlike common tracks, these churchways, or bier roads, followed deliberately sinuous routes, never straight-line paths, based on specific theological principles preventing spirits from traveling easily. Historical parish records document these meticulously maintained paths connecting remote communities to mother churches with burial rites, some extending 20-plus miles through difficult terrain. Most distinctive was their specialized infrastructure, corpse stones or resting stones placed at precisely calculated intervals matching pallbearer walking rhythms, allowing synchronized bearer changes without disrupting cadence believed necessary for proper soul transition. Archaeological surveys reveal these stones positioned exactly 250 paces apart, creating standardized resting intervals across disparate geographical regions. Local ecclesiastical records detail complex maintenance regulations. Corpse roads required minimum widths accommodating standardized bier dimensions while remaining separated from agricultural land by distinctive boundaries called church guards. The roads incorporated specific folklore design elements, crossing running water multiple times, spirits supposedly cannot cross water, traversing geographic features called Devil's Bridges, and incorporating protective wayside crosses marking transition points between parishes. Most remarkably, these paths created specialized legal easements. Even when crossing private property, landowners could not legally obstruct corpse roads under medieval common law, creating permanent right-of-way corridors that survive property division for centuries. The road's preservation stemmed from deep superstitious avoidance. Local populations refused to travel these paths after sunset, believing humans traveling in reverse of funeral direction risked spiritual attachment by lingering souls who naturally traveled toward the churchyard along these specially engineered spiritual corridors. The Iron Maiden represents medieval Europe's most sophisticated psychological torture device, incorporating multiple trauma mechanisms within a single apparatus. Unlike simpler implements, authentic Iron Maidens, Eiserne Jungfrau, featured precisely calibrated spike placement, targeting non-lethal penetration points, specifically avoiding vital organs while maximizing pain receptor concentration. Historical records from Nuremberg detail the device's careful engineering. Exterior spikes visible visible to victims before entry were longer than interior spikes, creating anticipatory terror exceeding actual physical damage. The maiden's interior contained specialized moisture collection channels harvesting victims' blood and bodily fluids, which continuously reapplied to the victim through capillary action, preventing wound clotting and maintaining consciousness. The device's name derives not from its victim profile, but from its exterior decoration. Many featured intricate feminine facial designs with articulated mechanical features, allowing the face to appear watching the victim. Most sophisticated versions incorporated acoustic engineering elements, internal chambers, amplifying victims' sounds while distorting them to observers outside, creating unnatural screaming effects enhancing psychological impact on those hearing the device in operation. Court documents from 1515 describe the standard operational protocol. Victims remained conscious inside for extended periods, with periodic opening and closing cycles creating wound pattern variations. The historically verified Nuremberg Maiden featured a distinctive clockwork timer automatically reopening the device at predetermined intervals, preventing victims from anticipating relief timing. Archaeological examination of execution chamber floors at Nuremberg Castle revealed distinctive blood drainage systems specifically designed to accommodate maiden operation, with graduated channels directing fluids to collection reservoirs used in subsequent interrogations to demonstrate the device's effects to new prisoners. Rome's final Numantine War, 134 to 133 BCE, culminated in history's most thoroughly documented siege cannibalism, systematically recorded by Roman observers. Unlike typical siege starvation, Numantia's isolation was absolute. Scipio Aemilianus constructed a complete circumvallation with 7 fortified camps and intervening walls stretching 9 kilometers, preventing any supplies from reaching the Celtiberian stronghold. Roman accounts describe the Numantine's systematic progression through survival stages, first consuming leather goods and tanning solutions, then transitioning to boiled tree bark and rodents before implementing organized anthropophagy. Archaeological evidence from excavated refuse middens confirms these accounts, revealing distinctive processing patterns on human bones identical to animal butchery techniques. Most disturbing were the discovered selection tablets, ceramic pieces inscribed with family groupings and numbers, apparently used for organizing rationing and determining who would be consumed. Roman witnesses documented the Numantine's methodical approach. The elderly and terminally ill were processed first, followed by executed criminals, with remaining residents divided into designated consumption groups, receiving precise portions. Unlike desperation cannibalism elsewhere, Numantia exhibited organizational sophistication, specialized preparation areas, standardized cutting techniques, and ritualized distribution protocols suggesting cultural adaptation rather than mere survival panic. When Scipio finally breached the city, his chroniclers recorded finding cooking vessels containing human remains, prepared with specific herbs and processing methods distinct from normal Celtiberian cuisine, indicating the development of specific preparation techniques over the siege's duration. Of the original 8,000 inhabitants, barely 4,000 remained, with survivors exhibiting distinctive physical changes from prolonged cannibalism, including gum recession and bone deformation, consistent with neurological effects of consuming human nervous tissue. Sparta's psychological warfare incorporated battlefield corpse manipulation as deliberate military doctrine rather than simple neglect. Unlike other Greek forces that negotiated battlefield truces for body recovery, Spartans intentionally left enemy dead exposed, subjecting them to calculated degradation. After major victories like Thermopylae and Mantinea, Spartan forces established defensive positions specifically to prevent body recovery, maintaining archers to target anyone attempting retrieval. Historical accounts document specialized Spartan units called Krepteia, tasked with nighttime corpse arrangement, positioning bodies in psychologically devastating tableaus, visible to enemy camps, sometimes incorporating captured standards and weapons to maximize humiliation. This practice extended beyond mere intimidation. Herodotus describes how Spartans studied decomposition progression, timing subsequent raids to coincide with maximum psychological impact when bodies reach peak bloating and discoloration. Archaeological evidence from battle sites reveals distinctive Spartan modification of battlefield topography, shallow trenches directing bodily fluids toward enemy water supplies, deliberately creating disease vectors. Most disturbing was the selective mutilation policy. Enemy commanders and distinguished warriors received targeted post-mortem treatment with specific, culturally significant disfigurements designed to prevent proper religious afterlife according to the victims' beliefs. The psychological effectiveness was documented by Thucydides, noting how opposing forces facing Spartans frequently suffered desertion problems before battles even began. This approach reflected Sparta's broader military philosophy, that victory extended beyond physical combat into the spiritual and psychological realms, with properly managed dead serving as perpetual combatants in an ongoing campaign of terror against enemies of the Lacedaemonian state. The Spanish Inquisition refined execution by garrote into a precision theological instrument featuring unique elements absent in secular executions. Unlike simple strangulation, the Inquisition's garrote incorporated key theological components: the seat, representing the throne of judgment, the backing post, symbolizing the cross, and the collar mechanism representing divine encirclement. Three distinct garrote variants existed: garrote vil, simple strangulation; garrote ordinario, crushing the trachea and carotid arteries simultaneously; and garrote noble, featuring a spike penetrating the cervical spine while crushing the airway. The executioner, verdugo, underwent specialized religious training, required to recite specific prayers during the execution, while operating the mechanism at precisely timed intervals, coordinated with the attending priest's benedictions. Historical records from Toledo detail the practice of paused execution, tightening the collar incrementally while priests offered multiple opportunities for additional confession. This created executions lasting 30+ minutes, with victims remaining conscious through much of the process. Notably, the Inquisition maintained detailed technical specifications. The Madrid Codex contains engineering diagrams specifying exact measurements and materials for maximum victim visibility and extended consciousness. The collar itself featured interior textured surfaces preventing skin slippage during application, ensuring the condemned remained properly positioned throughout. Most distinctively, Inquisition executions incorporated the final conversation, a carefully staged dialogue between executioner and victim, with the executioner ritually requesting forgiveness before killing, creating a performative absolution that transformed an execution into a mutual, spiritual transaction. This psychological element proved so effective that Spanish colonial authorities exported the practice to territories worldwide, with specialized garrotes shipped to Mexico, Peru, and the Philippines. Venice's precarious island geography created unique challenges during recurring plague outbreaks, necessitating specialized containment measures unseen elsewhere in Europe. Unlike mainland cities, Venice could not simply expand burial grounds, instead creating designated plague islands, Lazaretto Vecchio and Lazaretto Nuovo, where victims were systematically processed. Archaeological excavations in 2007 to 2012 revealed Venice's industrial-scale approach to plague management. Standardized burial trenches measuring exactly 5 meters wide by 20 meters long, optimized for maximum capacity with precisely arranged layers. Victims were buried in alternating orientations, heads to feet, maximizing space efficiency. Most disturbing were the specialized corpse transportation vessels called plague boats, Naviglio della Peste, black-painted barges designed specifically for corpse movement with sealed compartments preventing contamination of boatmen. Venetian archives document precise accounting. During the 1630 outbreak, these boats transported 500+ bodies daily, operating continuously through night hours, despite Venetian laws, typically forbidding night navigation. The excavated remains reveal Venice's unique approach to plague control, quicklime applied strategically to accelerate decomposition rather than prevent it, with drainage channels deliberately incorporated into pit design. Distinctive to Venetian pits were body breakers, Spezzacorpi, specialized workers who systematically broke victims' legs to ensure more compact arrangement when rigor mortis set in. Perhaps most chilling were the discovery of multiple bodies showing signs of antemortem restraint, suggesting advanced stage plague victims were sometimes transported to the islands while still alive but deemed medically hopeless. Their wrists bearing evidence of binding before death occurred on the plague islands. Norse chieftain funerals represented elaborate synchronized death rituals rather than simple cremations, coordinating multiple simultaneous sacrifices. Unlike romanticized depictions, historical accounts from Ibn Fadlan describe ceremonial preparations lasting 10 days, while the deceased chieftain's body underwent temporary burial. During this period, a female slave would be selected as the death companion and prepared through ritual intoxication and sexual rites, with multiple warriors who proclaim transmitting messages to their deceased leader. Archaeological evidence from Oseberg and Balater ship burials confirms these accounts, revealing female sacrificial victims with distinctive trauma patterns matching Ibn's descriptions. On the funeral day, the ship or pyre was prepared with precise orientation toward Valhalla, with the chieftain's body arranged with grave goods including weapons deliberately damaged to kill their spirits. The sacrificial companions, both human and animal, were not simply killed but strategically arranged alive on the pyre. Slaves received a complex drugged beverage of henbane, alcohol, and mushrooms, creating paralysis while maintaining consciousness. The Angel of Death, a designated older woman, would then perform ritualized strangulation of the female companion, while male warriors simultaneously dispatched other sacrificial victims. Most grimly, anthropological analysis of cremation sites indicates some victims regained mobility as flames engulfed them, with evidence of restraint points preventing escape. The practice reflected differential treatment in death. Chieftains died once, while thralls, slaves, experienced prolonged ceremonial deaths, their suffering considered necessary to properly announce the chieftain's arrival in the afterlife. China's ancient practice of ghost marriages evolved into a grim underground economy during the Ming and Qing dynasties, creating demand for female corpses to serve as eternal companions for deceased unmarried men. Unlike symbolic ghost marriages using effigies or tablets, elite families sought actual female corpses, preferably young women who died unmarried. Historical records from Shaanxi province detail specialized brokers who negotiated between families with recently deceased daughters and those seeking brides for departed sons. The preparation process involved specialized corpse brides artisans who treated female remains with mercury compounds and binding techniques to delay decomposition, applying makeup, and arranging bodies in wedding finery. Most disturbingly, a shadow industry emerged providing manufactured brides, fresh female corpses acquired through murder when natural deaths proved insufficient. Qing dynasty legal archives document multiple bride murder cases, particularly during 1680 to 1720 when imperial edicts specifically targeted those who murder women for their corpses. Archaeological excavations at Yangshushan revealed tomb complexes with side chambers constructed specifically for corpse brides, positioned alongside male occupants in elaborate wedding tableaus with complete dowry objects. Analysis of recovered remains indicates many females died from frontal skull trauma or strangulation, consistent with procurement murders. The practice intensified during periods of natural disaster and famine when desperate families sold daughters, sometimes still living, to ghost marriage brokers. Despite official prohibition, grave robbing arrest records from the 1800s document continued demand, with female corpses commanding prices 10 times higher than male remains, driving highly specialized grave robbery targeting young women's tombs. Salem's witch trials employed a particularly insidious test absent from most official records but documented in personal accounts: the swimming, or water ordeal. Unlike standard gallows executions, this procedure exploited theological beliefs about water's purity, rejecting evil elements. Accused witches underwent specific preparation, bound in the witch's cradle position with right thumb to left toe and left thumb to right toe, creating an unnatural posture impossible to maintain without supernatural aid. The bound accused was then lowered into specifically selected bodies of water. Salem records mention Proctor's Ledge Pond and the North River as test sites, using specialized ropes allowing immediate retrieval. The drowning test created an impossible double bind. Floating proved guilt through supernatural rejection by pure water, while sinking demonstrated innocence but frequently resulted in drowning before retrieval. Particularly cruel, authorities often conducted these tests privately with minimal witnesses, allowing no interference from family members. Unlike European witch trials where swimming tests potentially offered survival, Salem's implementation proved exceptionally deadly. Bridget Bishop's interrogation records indicate she survived floating, only to face hanging anyway, as the test had confirmed her guilt. Archaeological evidence suggests some victims' remains never received proper burial, instead interred in unmarked locations near testing sites. Most disturbing were delayed drownings, victims who initially survived the ordeal but succumbed to aspiration pneumonia or hypothermia days later. Their delayed deaths interpreted as further evidence of diabolical influence, requiring family payment for constant prayer and medical monitoring until death finally claimed them. The Tzompantli skull rack of Tenochtitlan represented the Aztec Empire's most monumental expression of sacrificial power. Unlike smaller provincial displays, the Great Tzompantli in the imperial capital featured an innovative architectural design, a wooden scaffolding measuring 60 feet in length with horizontal poles arranged in parallel rows, creating a massive display grid. After ritual sacrifice atop temple pyramids, specialists extracted victims' heads and processed them through skull preservation techniques, removing brain matter, eyes, and soft tissue while drilling precise bilateral holes through the temporal bones. These holes accommodated wooden poles, allowing each skull to slide into position, facing outward, on the display. Unlike European customs of anonymous mass display, Aztec priests maintained meticulous records, identifying each skull by name, origin, and capture circumstances. The Tzompantli functioned as a dynamic installation. New skulls were continuously added while older weathered ones were removed to specialized skull chambers beneath temples. Spanish conquistador Andrés de Tapia recorded counting 136,000 skulls in 1521. Though modern archaeological excavations at the Templo Mayor site suggest this figure represents accumulated capacity rather than simultaneous display. The religious significance transcended mere intimidation. Each skull embodied captured enemy energy, Teolia, feeding the sun god Huitzilopochtli, physically manifesting Aztec cosmic maintenance. Most remarkably, pigment analysis from recovered skull fragments indicates faces were painted with distinctive patterns denoting the specific deity to whom they were sacrificed, creating an enormous macabre mosaic visible across the ancient city. London's 1832 and 1854 cholera epidemics overwhelmed existing burial infrastructure, creating a grotesque crisis in the city's poorest districts. Impoverished parishes like St. Giles and Bethnal Green resorted to mass graves, trenches measuring 20 feet wide by 60 feet long, dug only 6 feet deep despite regulations requiring greater depth. Each pit received between 40 to 60 bodies daily, arranged in crude wooden coffins stacked 8 deep with minimal soil separation. The shallow nature of these interments, combined with London's high water table, created a phenomenon described by the Times as miasmic upheaval, corpse gases causing bodies to rise toward the surface. Summer rains frequently exposed decomposing limbs and faces, while intense putrefaction created bluish flames of phosphorescent gases visible after sunset. These corpse lights became folklore omens, with locals avoiding streets with active pits after dark. Entrepreneur George Alfred Walker documented these conditions in his 1839 exposé, Gatherings from Graveyards, recording how poor families lived in basement dwellings with walls literally seeping graveyard effluence. Most distressingly, parish records reveal multiple instances of premature burial during the height of epidemics, with coffins opened during pit relocations, showing scratch marks inside lids and bodies in contorted positions. The health threat posed by these improper burials directly influenced London's sanitation reforms and the creation of large cemeteries outside city limits, as physician John Snow linked one outbreak directly to water contaminated by a Broad Street cholera pit in 1854. Among Elizabethan England's psychological torture innovations, rat torture combined psychological terror with devastating physical damage. Unlike simpler physical torments, this method began with careful psychological preparation. Prisoners observed rats being starved for days before their interrogation. During questioning, a specialized metal container called a rat's cradle was positioned against the prisoner's abdomen or chest, with one open end facing the victim's bare skin. Several starving rats would be placed inside before the closed end was slowly heated. As the temperature rose, the panicked rodents had only one escape route: through the prisoner's flesh. Uniquely horrific, victims remained fully conscious while experiencing the sensation of animals burrowing into their bodies. Interrogators calibrated the torture precisely, keeping the heating gradual to prolong the ordeal while preventing rats from dying from excessive heat. Court records from the Tower of London document this method's effectiveness at extracting confessions within minutes, particularly from gentlefolk unused to physical hardship. The torture's genius lay in its progressively worsening nature, as initial scratches evolved into deep tunneling, with rats sometimes reaching vital organs. Unlike rack torture, which left victims incapacitated, rat torture's wounds could potentially heal if infection didn't set in, allowing repeated sessions. The psychological aftermath proved equally devastating, with survivors developing permanent phobias and recurrent nightmares. The practice remained technically illegal, but tacitly authorized, through Privy Council warrants during periods of political instability, particularly following Catholic conspiracy attempts against Elizabeth I's Protestant regime. Operating across central India until the 1830s, the Thuggee cult elevated murder to religious practice through precisely choreographed strangulation rituals spanning centuries. Unlike common bandits, thugs considered their killings sacred offerings to the goddess Kali, adhering to complex protocols. The yellow or white silk rumal, handkerchief, used for strangulation, underwent consecration with Kali's sacred gur, brown sugar, which thugs also consumed as communion before killings. Victims were selected specifically for their wealth and distance from home, allowing thugs to assume travelers' identities after burial, sometimes continuing journeys to preserve the deception. Strangulation followed exacting methodology. One thug, the holder, engaged the victim in conversation while positioning him. The strangler approached from behind with the rumal, and a third, the leg holder, secured the victim's legs during the killing. British colonial records document specialized grave diggers using modified pickaxes that left no visible soil disturbance, burying victims face down to prevent their spirits from haunting killers. The cult maintained unique terminology, thuggee, from Sanskrit stag, to conceal, with members belonging to both Hindu and Muslim faiths united by devotion to Kali. Colonial Administrator William Sleeman finally suppressed the cult through informants and systematic investigation, documenting over 40,000 victims. Most disturbingly, confessed thugs reported no remorse, believing victims predestined by Kali, with one captured thug, Barum, claiming personal involvement in 931 ritual murders. The 872-day Nazi blockade of Leningrad, 1941 to 1944, created history's most devastating urban famine. By November 1941, residents received just 250 grams of bread daily, a bread consisting largely of sawdust, cellulose, and floor sweepings. As temperatures plunged to minus 30 degrees Celsius, the city's infrastructure collapsed completely. Desperate Leningraders stripped buildings of wooden fixtures, books, and furniture for heating, while consuming substances never meant for human consumption. Leather belts and shoes were boiled for hours to produce edible gelatin. Workers at the Badaev warehouse licked floors where sugar had melted into the wood during bombing. The Botanical Institute distributed pamphlets identifying edible plants, mosses, and processing methods for cooking oil from linseed. Survivors documented precisely calibrated death watches. families observing starving members waiting for death to claim ration cards before reporting the demise. Most horrifically, NKVD records document 1,979 arrests for cannibalism during the siege, divided into two legal categories: corpse eating and murder for consumption. Morgues were frequently raided, while some formed hunting gangs targeting isolated individuals. The dead accumulated faster than they could be buried, with over 100,000 corpses in January 1942 alone stacked in streets and vacant buildings. Dmitri Shostakovich's famous Seventh Symphony premiered in the besieged city in August 1942, performed by starving musicians who frequently collapsed during rehearsals, creating an iconic moment of defiance against what became history's most lethal siege. In Assyria's brutal justice system, corrupt judiciary faced a fate befitting their betrayal of trust. King Ashur-nasirpal II, 883 to 859 BCE, institutionalized judicial flaying as official policy, documented in palace reliefs and cuneiform tablets. When judges accepted bribes or rendered false verdicts, they faced public execution, where skilled torturers removed their skin while keeping them alive throughout much of the process. Beginning at the back, executioners meticulously separated skin from muscle using specialized bronze knives with curved tips, preserving the skin intact. The flayed skins were then cured with salt, stretched on wooden frames, and prominently displayed on city walls or government buildings with identifying inscriptions. Archaeological findings at Nineveh revealed palace walls with iron hooks specifically designed for hanging these human skins. Remarkably, the judge's family was often forced to witness the entire procedure, after which they'd be assigned to maintain the displayed skin of their relative, keeping it oiled and preventing deterioration. This ensured multi-generational trauma and compliance. The Assyrian legal code explicitly stated, "The judge whose judgment is reversed shall pay 12 times the penalty in the case and publicly be removed from the judge's seat and never again sit with judges." This removal was literal. The living skin taken from the corrupt official served as both punishment and perpetual warning to subsequent judges, deliberating cases under their predecessors' preserved remains. Medieval Europe's response to leprosy created a social death before physical demise. When diagnosed with this disfiguring bacterial infection, individuals underwent the separatio leprosorum, a church ceremony legally declaring them dead to society. Priests would scatter dirt on the afflicted person's head while reading funeral rites, effectively ending their previous identity. The condemned would receive specialized equipment, wooden clappers or bells to announce their approach, a distinctive hooded cloak, and a wooden drinking cup no one else would touch. Some regions enforced branding with the L mark on foreheads or hands. The colonies themselves, called leprosaria, were strategically positioned near running water but downstream from settlements, with over 19,000 such facilities across Europe at leprosy's peak in the 13th century. Inside these colonies, strict hierarchies developed, with the recently diagnosed and less disfigured maintaining distance from advanced cases. Leper houses operated under St. Lazarus's patronage, hence Lazaretto, with inmates forbidden from speaking loudly, touching children, or handling fresh food in markets. Even their testimony in legal proceedings was invalid. Archaeological evidence from sites like the St. Mary Magdalene Leprosarium in Winchester reveals segregated burial grounds and distinctive skeletal deformities. Perhaps most tragically, medieval medical knowledge recognized the disease's contagious nature, but had no understanding of its slow progression or minimal transmissibility, condemning thousands to unnecessary isolation. During the Golden Age of piracy, 1650 to 1730, naval authorities developed a macabre deterrent for would-be pirates, the gibbet cage. Unlike standard gallows, these specialized iron frameworks were designed to display executed pirates prominently along coastlines and harbor entrances. After hanging, pirates' bodies were coated in tar or oil to slow decomposition, then suspended in these anatomically designed cages that conform to the human shape. Locations like Execution Dock in London and Port Royal in Jamaica became infamous for these displays, where notorious captains like William Kidd and Calico Jack Rackham swung for years. The placement was strategic. Positioned at low tide mark, the rising waters would submerge the bodies before revealing them again, creating the illusion they were being executed twice. Colonial governors specifically mandated these cages remain untouched, with penalties for anyone attempting to remove remains. The practice was so effective that sailors approaching pirate-frequented harbors would encounter dozens of blackened, preserved corpses in various states of decay. Historical records indicate some gibbet cages remained occupied for over 2 decades, with bones eventually disarticulating and dropping into the waters below. The psychological impact was precisely calculated, reminding sailors that choosing piracy meant not only death but perpetual, undignified display as carrion for seabirds and a warning to all who passed.